විම් දියර මිලිලීටර් 100 ස්මාර්ට් පැක් එක රුපියල් 85ට දැන් වෙළඳ පොලේ.
හරිම සුමුදුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Thursday the 2nd of March 2023. Equality. Recent IRD circular on taxable individual remuneration violates basic tax principle of fairness.
What we can see is there's a classification, there's one set of people who will be entitled for a different treatment, a beneficial treatment, whereas all the others are discriminated.
Good sign. Sri Lanka welcomes over 100 Chinese tourists just as China reopens its borders after prolonged restrictions.
ඉදිරි කාලය තුළ විශාල සංචාරක ප්‍රමාණයක් චීනෙන් පමණක් ලැබීම තුළින් අපේ ආර්ථිකයට විශාල ශක්තියක් ලැබෙයි.
Fundamental. People should be allowed to express their views freely, says Envoy. Universal franchise. Election Commission to announce new dates for local government elections tomorrow.
Alliance Finance මෙතුරු රන්නයි සේවාවෙන් රන් පවුම්කට රුපියල් 1,70,000ක ඉහළ අධිකාරම.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Andrew Bernard. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. In your top story for tonight, in an attempt to promote investment opportunities in Sri Lanka, President Ranil Wickremesinghe says that investments to agriculture should be facilitated and investment information must be digitalized. As a first step, the head of state instructed officials to look into revising the Agricultural Development Act and Land and Paddy Act to meet requirements of the day. He was addressing state officials and the heads of line ministries during a progress review of the implementation of Buddhist proposals for investment promotion and efficient use of land. According to a statement from the President's office, the head of state has instructed to digitize investment information, making it easily accessible with the aim of encouraging and promoting investment opportunities in Sri Lanka and allowing investors to identify new investment prospects with ease. During a meeting with key public sector officials, including Secretary to the President Saman Ekanayake and Finance Secretary Mahinda Siriwardana, President Ranil Wickremesinghe noted that investment opportunities in the agricultural sector should be facilitated, as agriculture remains a vital contributor to the national economy. Thereby, the President has pointed out the need for revising the Agricultural Development Act and Paddy Land Act to meet current requirements. Meanwhile, during the discussion, the President has also highlighted the importance of promptly identifying underutilized state-owned lands to create a data bank of relevant information in order to enable better management and utilization of land resources. Furthermore, heads of line agencies were also present during the meeting to discuss the progress of implementing budget proposals and to provide insights into the challenges faced in promoting investment and the efficient land use. Now, as politicians are unable to see the way forward amid the economic crisis, the Deputy Ambassador of the United States in Colombo, Douglas Sonek, believes that allowing the people to express their views freely amid the economic crisis remains crucial for the country to find solutions. Addressing media in Kandy, Sonek added that the United States is currently working with the government on economic and structural reforms.
During his visit to Kandy, the Deputy Ambassador of the United States in Colombo, Douglas Sonek, called on the Chief Prelate of the Askiriya chapter, Most Venerable Warakagoda Sri Jnanaratana Thera, at the Askiriya Vihare yesterday. Later, he visited the Malwatta Mahavihare and called on the Chief Prelate of the Malwatta chapter, Most Venerable Tibbatuwabe Sri Sumangala Thera.
Over the last year, the United States has provided $270 million to Sri Lanka in this time of economic crisis. We have focused on providing that to the most affected by the economic crisis. More than 30 million, for example, going to farmers to provide fertilizer so that their crops can be fertile in the new planting seasons. We have also provided money to provide food for school lunches or for lactating mothers. And all of these things are ways that we try to provide humanitarian assistance to Sri Lankans in need. At the same time, we're trying to work with the government on the types of regulations, the type of structural reforms that can make the economy function more efficiently and deliver for the people of Sri Lanka. The economic crisis makes it very difficult for politicians to see the way forward. And the United States believes firmly that being able to express peacefully their views and the values of the Sri Lankan people is very important to finding the kinds of solutions that will make Sri Lanka a free, open, interconnected, and prosperous country.
Now, the Election Commission will be convening tomorrow to decide a new date for the local government election. The meeting will be attended by the chairman of the Commission, Nimalji Punchiheva, and members M.M. Mohammed and the S.B. Davaratna and P.P. Patirana. Following the meeting tomorrow, the Election Commission is expected to hold a special meeting and announcing the decisions that took place during the meeting. On the 24th of February, the Election Commission announced that the local government election will not be held on the 9th of March as scheduled due to matters beyond the control of the election body. Now, leader of the Samagi Jana Balawegaya, Sajith Premadasa, assured that a government under his leadership will establish a fair and equitable economic pattern. Speaking at an election campaign rally in Godakavela, Premadasa said that the public income levels will be strengthened and their contribution will be obtained in building the country.
The Samagi Jana Balawegaya held an election campaign rally in Godakavela in the Ratnapura district yesterday under the patronage of its party leader, Sajith Premadasa.
The current and previous governments have already dragged the people in this country to the grave. Electricity tariffs have increased by 250%, taxes are relentlessly imposed, and the people are left to starve. At a time when the country has fallen into an unfortunate state, we are sure to establish a fair and equitable economic structure under the Samagi Jana Balawegaya government. We will create an era where people will be prosperous in a country built with your efforts under a new Premadasa concept.
Nava Premadasa Sankalpekata Oba Pasilu Denama Atal Benaganui Kira Yojana Karano.
Now, on our current affairs program at Hyde Park, the recent circular issued by the Commissioner General of Inland Revenue on the 7th of February, amending his previous circular date, December 22, 2022, on the quantification of values for non-cash benefits in calculating employment income for taxation, was taken up for discussion. Tax and regulatory expert Suresh Pereira pointed out that a select group among the state sector have been granted relief as per the new circular. Speaking to Indivari Amwata at Hyde Park, the tax expert noted that the basic tax principle of fairness had been violated as a result.
Does this mean this amendment seems to be benefiting ministers and those in public office than the private sector?
There are certain benefits that are coming for both public sector as well as the private sector. But there are certain benefits that could be enjoyed only by that too if they are in a particular category. Now there is this new introduction that has been introduced. This was not there in the earlier circular. That is, there are persons who are entitled, let's say, for a vehicle or for fuel quantity or maybe communication facilities due to the phrase used in the document here is circular, directive or a regulation issued on behalf of the government. So that means basically talking about the public servants, right? The practice that we see in the public sector is, though they are entitled for this car, they don't take the car. In lieu of that, they are paid a cash. They are given a traveling allowance. They are given a fuel allowance. So now this rule says, in a scenario of that nature, let's say basically instead of taking your car, you get 100,000 cash. That traveling allowance is liable for tax. Those who opt for a cash allowance instead of taking the vehicle or the fuel quantity, this rule says if that public servant gets 100,000, that 100,000 is not taken for tax. Only 25% of will be taken for tax. 25% of the traveling allowance, 25% of the fuel allowance will be taken for tax. Now this is where this issue of discrimination, or basically equality before the law, the issue comes up. What we can see is there's a classification, there's a category, one set of people who will be entitled for a different treatment, a beneficial treatment, whereas all the others are discriminated. They are not getting that. Though I use the word public servant, you have to keep in mind, this is not for all public servants also. It's only for those public servants where they are entitled under the circular directive or regulation issued by the government for a vehicle or a fuel quantity or communication facility. So only a selected category will fall.
Category?
Employees in the state banks are not eligible for this. This is only those who are in the government departments, is what I have been told.
Are we looking at a policy that actually treats the private sector and the public sector, a select group, in a different way?
This is not exactly public sector, private sector issue. You can take even two public servants. So one person, because he is entitled for a vehicle under the circular or the directive issued on behalf of the government, is getting this benefit, whereas another public servant who's not falling within that circular directive or the regulation, he's not getting it. The discrimination could be even there also, even within the public sector also. So the question here is there a violation of the equality before the law? Now, under Article 100, and this issue of tax policies and the concept of equality before the law have been tested in courts in Sri Lanka as well as in other countries also. The courts will get involved only if there is manifest discrimination and if they see there is a violation only. They give very wide discretion to the parliament to do this classification. Again, the courts have pointed out parliament has the right to classify, but this classification can't be arbitrary. This classification should have some kind of a rationale. There has to be a rational basis and there has to be an intelligible differential, and the differential must bear a rational relation to the object sought to be achieved by it. Now we see all two groups here. People who are entitled under the circular directive for this concession and people who are not. Now, is this classification rational? Classification bearing any logic to the object sought to be achieved. What is object sought to be achieved here? In case of tax amnesty, okay, bring more revenue to the tax system to get the evaders back into the tax net. But here what are we doing? What is the object we are trying to achieve? So my personal view is that if a fundamental rights case is filed in relation to this issue, courts will, of course, at the end of the day, it's the courts that will have to pronounce whether this is in violation of the Article 12. My personal opinion is there's a greater chance to sustain that there is a discrimination of the category that are not getting this benefit. That this benefit should be extended to all, not only to one category.
Now, the International Monetary Fund says that the tax rates introduced by Sri Lankan authorities are in line with the international comparison. In response to recent media questions around the income tax hikes in Sri Lanka, IMF Senior Mission Chief for Sri Lanka, Peter Brewer, and the IMF Chief Mission for Sri Lanka, Masahiro Nozaki, said that efforts to increase tax revenues should be pursued in a growth-friendly manner while protecting the poor and most vulnerable. It is, however, also important that those who cannot afford it make commensurate contributions to the financing of the necessary government expenditures. The IMF officials said that tax package the authorities have introduced, including the new tax rate schedule for the personal income tax, helps to meet the objectives. They say that Sri Lanka is among the countries to collect the least amount of fiscal revenue in the world, with the tax revenue to GDP ratio at only 7.3% in 2021. External creditors are not willing to provide financing to fill the gap, adding that tax reforms are needed to correct this imbalance. The statement also went on to say that only with appropriate tax receipts will the government be able to stay and fund essential expenditures and avoid the further slashing of critically important outlays. These reforms will also help regain confidence of creditors. A statement said that efforts to increase tax revenue should be pressured in growth-friendly manner while protecting the poor and most vulnerable. But it is, however, also important that those who cannot afford it make commensurate contributions to the financing of the necessary government expenditure. The Politburo member of the National People's Power, K.D. Lanka urges that the Election Commission to provide the closest date possible for the local government election to protect the people's franchise. Addressing an election campaign rally in Matale, he said that they will be able to seek a court order directing the Ministry of Finance to release the necessary funds for the election.
An election campaign rally of the Jatika Janabalawegaya was held in Matale yesterday under the patronage of its Politburo member Kedi Lalkanta.
හොරාකාපු මහජන ධනය නැවත රජයට පවරාගත යුතුයි.
The stolen money of the people should be taken into government custody. We request the police and the army not to defend these thieves. If these thieves are destroying the country that we have safeguarded, we won't be able to develop it. All of us should rally around the symbol of the compass and express our objection to these thieves. All of you should be responsible to do that. The Election Commission will meet tomorrow. We request the Commission to announce the closest possible date for the election in order to protect the people's democratic right as per the Constitution. We request the Election Commission to seek judicial assistance. We will also inform the court to order the Ministry of Finance to release funds allocated for the election. We will intervene in this matter at our fullest capacity and will seek support of international organizations.
ඊළඟට අපි ජාත්‍යන්තර සංවිධාන ඇතුළු මේ වෙනුවෙන් මැදිහත් වෙන්න පුළුවන් සෑම දෙයකටම මැදිහත් වෙනවා.
Welcome back. A group of 120 Chinese tourists arrived in Sri Lanka as the first batch of tourists from China following the reopening of its airspace after COVID-19 pandemic-related restrictions for inbound and outbound travel was relaxed. Addressing media at the airport, Tourism Minister Harin Fernando pointed out that the arrival of Chinese tourists in large numbers will help the country's economic revival. Meanwhile, the national carrier Sri Lankan Airlines will begin to operate 9 weekly flights to a number of cities in China, including the capital, Beijing.
At the Bandaranaike International Airport in Katnaika, Sri Lanka welcomed the first batch of tourists from China after the country relaxed restrictions to the COVID-19 pandemic and opened its airspace. 120 Chinese tourists arrived on board a Sri Lankan Airlines flight last night. Officials including Minister of Tourism Harin Fernando, State Minister of Foreign Affairs Tharka Balasuriya and the Chinese Ambassador to Sri Lanka Chi Cheng Hong were present at the airport to welcome the group.
From
the 4th week of April, Sri Lankan Airlines will operate 9 flights per week to Shanghai, Beijing and Guangzhou in China. We believe that the arrival of Chinese tourists this year will improve the Sri Lankan tourism industry. The Sri Lankan economy will be strengthened with the arrival of Chinese tourists in the future. If 500,000 Chinese tourists arrive and each bring in $5,000, the total revenue will be equivalent to the amount that we will be receiving from the IMF. This will result in an improvement of the current situation in the country and the appreciation of the rupee against the US dollar. Our only request from all Sri Lankans is to treat the tourists with respect and hospitality.
Happy
to see the first batch Chinese tourists come to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is very beautiful. The people very friendly and kindly. Most Chinese people like to visit Sri Lanka because of COVID-19. The waiting for nearly 3 years, but now the dream is coming into realities. I hope more and more Chinese tourists will come to the Sri Lanka. That is a very important part of two countries, people-to-people exchanges.
දැන් ගුවන්තොටුපළට දිනකට එන සංචාරකයන් ප්‍රමාණය ඉතාම වැඩි වෙලා තියෙනවා. 4000ක් පමණ දැන් ඒව ආරම්භ වෙලා තියෙනවා එක දිනකට.
Now, Sri Lankan shares closed higher for a second straight session today, helped in gains by the financial stocks. The all-share price index ended 1.2% higher at 9,333.83. LOLC Holdings and Hatton National Bank were the biggest boost to the index, rising 2.3% and 7.8% respectively. Trading volume on the CSE all-share index rose to 78.4 million shares and 43 million in the previous session. The market turnover rose to 1.45 billion Sri Lankan rupees from 1.27 billion rupees in the previous session. Foreign investors in the meantime were net buyers purchasing shares worth 133.4 million rupees, while domestic investors were net sellers offloading stocks worth 1.37 billion rupees. Now, the Sri Lankan rupee further appreciated against the US dollar today, and the buying rate reached 348 rupees and 97 cents, while the selling rate was at 356 rupees and 78 cents. Yesterday, the rupee also marked such a record high against the US dollar. Now, oil edged higher today through gains made on signs of a strong economic rebound in top crude importer China, were kept in check by fears over the impact of potential increases to European interest rates.
Brent crude futures rose by 0.5% to settle at $84.74 a barrel. Meanwhile, US West Texas Intermediate crude futures were also up by 0.5% and settled at $78.14. Data yesterday showed that the manufacturing activity in China grew at the fastest pace in more than a decade last month, adding to evidence of a rebound in the world's second largest economy after removal of strict COVID-19 curbs. China's seaborne imports of Russian oil are set to hit a record high this month as refiners take advantage of cheap prices. However, the market was pressured by growing expectations of rate increases by the European Central Bank after faster than expected acceleration in consumer prices in France, Spain and Germany.
The world stocks stumbled today as pressurized by the pullback in the Chinese stocks and high US yields amid fears and the Federal Reserve and European Central Bank will keep raising interest rates to combat high inflation. Meanwhile, in Asia, the markets finished lower today with shares in Hong Kong leading the region. European shares dropped to a one-month low today as stickier than expected Eurozone inflation numbers justified what is widely expected to be another 50 basis point hike in the European Central Bank's already decade-high rates this month. Consumer price inflation in the 20 countries sharing the euro currency eased to 8.5% last month from 8.6% a month earlier on lower energy prices. The MSCI's broadest index of world shares dipped by 0.2%, hovering near 7-week lows. Meanwhile, the Stoxx 600 index slid by 0.3% and Wall Street's S&P futures were down by 0.6%. Investor enthusiasm was faded over China's economic reopening after Beijing dismantled its strict COVID-19 controls in December, as analysts look for more evidence to gauge the pace of economic recovery. In currency markets, the US dollar index measuring the value against a basket of major peers gained 0.2% to 104.62. The euro lost 0.4% to 1.0625 and the pound dipped by 0.42% with hotter than expected inflation numbers, adding to pressure on the European Central Bank to raise rates. Meanwhile, in Asia, the Asia-Pacific stock markets were mostly lower today, with concerns over further Federal Reserve rate hikes back in focus following yesterday's boost from a strong Chinese manufacturing purchases managers index reading. The Hang Seng index was down 0.85%, while Japan's Nikkei 225 was off by 0.06%, and China's Shanghai Composite was lower by 0.05%. And that's all the news we have for you this evening. Join us again tomorrow for the very latest news at the very same time. Subscribe to our social media pages to stay updated on the latest news. Have a pleasant evening and good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.